Antigua.
Antigua, also known as Waladli, is an island in the West Indies, in the Leeward Islands in the Caribbean region, the main island of the country of Antigua and Barbuda. Antigua means ancient in Spanish after an icon in Seville Cathedral, Santa Maria de la Antigua, Saint Mary of the Old Cathedral. The name Waladli comes from the native Indian inhabitants and means approximately our own. The island's circumference is roughly 87 kilometers and its area 281 kilometers too. Its population was 80,161. The economy is mainly reliant on tourism, with the agricultural sector serving the domestic market. Over 31,000 people live in the capital city, St. John's, at 17-6 and 61-45W/17.100 DEG and 61.750 DEGW/17.100. -61.750. The capital is situated in the northwest and has a deep harbour which is able to accommodate large cruise ships. Other leading population settlements are All Saints, 3,412 and Liberta, 2,239, according to the 2001 census. English Harbour on the southeastern coast is famed for its protected shelter during violent storms. It is the site of a restored British colonial naval station called Nelson's Dockyard after Captain Horatio Nelson. Today English Harbour and the neighbouring village of Falmouth are internationally famous as a yachting and sailing destination and provisioning centre. During Antigua Sailing Week, at the end of April and beginning of May, the annual world-class regatta brings many sailing vessels and sailors to the island to play sports.
Economy.
Antigua's economy is reliant upon tourism, and it promotes the island as a luxury Caribbean escape. Many hotels and resorts are located around the coastline. The island's single airport is served by several major airlines, including Virgin Atlantic, British Airways, U.S. Airways, American Airlines, United Airlines, Delta Airlines, Caribbean Airlines, Air Canada, WestJet and LIAT. The only regular service to Barbuda flies from V.C. Bird Airport. The United States Air Force maintains a small base near the airport as part of its eastern range, used for space missions and communications. The growing medical school and its students also add much to the economy. The University of Health Sciences Antigua, UHSA, and the American University of Antigua, AUA, College of Medicine teach aspiring doctors. The country's official currency is the East Caribbean dollar. Given the dominance of tourism, many prices in tourist-oriented businesses are shown in US dollars. The EC dollar is pegged to the US dollar at a fixed rate of $1 equals 2.7169 East Caribbean dollars.
History. Early Antiguans.
Prior to European colonialism, the first residents were the Cerboni people. Eventually, Arawak Indians migrated from the mainland, followed by the Carib. Christopher Columbus would be the first European to visit Antigua, in 1493. The Arawak were the first well-documented group of indigenous people to settle Antigua. They paddled to the island by canoe, piragua, from present-day Venezuela, pushed out by the Carib, another indigenous people. The Arawak introduced agriculture to Antigua and Barbuda. Among other crops, they cultivated the now noted Antiguan black pineapple. They also cultivated foods including corn, sweet potatoes, white with firmer flesh than the bright orange sweet potato used in the United States, chili peppers, guava, tobacco, cotton. Some of the vegetables listed, such as corn and sweet potatoes, still are staples of Antiguan cuisine. Colonists took them to Europe, and from there, they spread around the world. For example, a popular Antiguan dish, ducuma/do, kuna/ is a sweet, steamed dumpling made from grated sweet potatoes, flour and spices. Another staple, fungi/fu, ndzi/, is a cooked paste made of cornmeal and water. Most of the Arawak left Antigua about AD 1100. Those who remained were raided by the Carib coming from Venezuela. According to the Catholic Encyclopedia, the Caribs' superior weapons and seafaring prowess allowed them to defeat most Arawak nations in the West Indies. They enslaved some and cannibalized others. The Catholic Encyclopedia does note that the European invaders had difficulty identifying and differentiating between the various native peoples they encountered. As a result, the number and types of ethnic tribal national groups at the time may have been more varied and numerous than the two mentioned in this article. The indigenous West Indians made excellent sea vessels, which they used to sail the Atlantic and Caribbean. As a result, the Arawak and Carib populated much of the South American and the Caribbean islands. Their descendants lived throughout South America, particularly Brazil, Venezuela and Colombia. The native identified populations in the West Indies maintain a pride in their heritage.
Europeans.
Christopher Columbus named the island Antigua in 1493 in honor of the Virgin of the Old Cathedral, Spanish, La Virgen de la Antigua, found in Seville Cathedral in southern Spain. On his 1493 voyage, honoring a vow, he named many islands after different aspects of Saint Mary, including Montserrat and Guadeloupe. In 1632, a group of English colonists left St. Kitts to settle on Antigua. Sir Christopher Codrington, an Englishman, established the first permanent European settlement. From that point on, Antigua history took a dramatic turn. Codrington guided development on the island as a profitable sugar colony. For a large portion of Antigua history, the island was considered Britain's gateway to the Caribbean. It was located on the major sailing routes among the region's resource-rich colonies. Lord Horatio Nelson, a major figure in Antigua history, arrived in the late 18th century to preserve the island's commercial shipping prowess. According to A Brief History of the Caribbean, European and African diseases, malnutrition and slavery eventually destroyed the vast majority of the Caribbean's native population. No researcher has conclusively proven any of these causes as the real reason for the destruction of West Indian natives. In fact, some historians believe that the psychological stress of slavery may also have played a part in the massive number of native deaths while in servitude. Others believe that the reportedly abundant, but starchy, low-protein diet may have contributed to severe malnutrition of the Indians, who were used to a diet fortified with protein from seal leaf.
Slavery.
Sugar became Antigua's main crop in about 1674, when Christopher Codrington settled at Betty's Hope estate. He came from Barbados, bringing the latest sugar technology with him. Betty's Hope, Antigua's first full-scale sugar plantation, was so successful that other planters turned from tobacco to sugar. This resulted in their importing slaves to work the sugar cane crops. According to A Brief History of the Caribbean, many West Indian colonists initially tried to use Indians as slaves. These groups succumbed easily to disease and/or malnutrition, and died by the thousands. The African slaves adapted well to the new environment and thus became the #1 choice of unpaid labor. In fact, the slaves thrived physically and also provided medical services, and skilled labor, such as carpentry for their slave masters. Today, collectors prize the uniquely designed colonial furniture built by West Indian slaves. Many of these works feature what are now considered traditional motifs, such as pineapples, fish and stylized serpents. According to A History of Antigua by Brian Dyde, by the mid-1770s, the number of slaves had increased to 37,500 from 12,500 in 1713, whereas the white population had fallen from 5,000 to below 3,000. The slaves lived in wretched and overcrowded conditions, and could be mistreated or even killed by their owners with impunity. The Slave Act of 1723 made arbitrary murder of slaves illegal, but did not do much to ease their lives. Unrest among the slaves became increasingly common. In 1729, a slave named Hercules was hanged, drawn and quartered, and 3 others burnt alive, for conspiring to kill the slave owner Crump and his family. In 1736, a slave called Prince Claus, whose real name was Court, planned an uprising in which whites would be massacred. Court was crowned king of the Coromantese in a pasture outside the capital of St. John's, in what appeared to be just a colorful spectacle, but was for the slaves a ritual declaration of war on the whites. Due to information obtained from other slaves, colonists discovered the plot and suppressed it. Prince Claus and 4 accomplices were caught and executed by the breaking wheel. 6 slaves were hanged in chains and starved to death, and another 58 were burned at the stake. The site of these executions is now the Antiguan Recreation Ground. The American War of Independence in the late 18th century disrupted the Caribbean sugar trade. At the same time, public opinion in Britain gradually turned against slavery. Traveling. At slavery's end, Sturge and Harvey, 1838. Found few married slaves residing together or even in the same estate. Slaveholders often counted as married only those slaves with mates on the estate. Great Britain abolished the slave trade in 1807, and all existing slaves were emancipated in 1834.
Horatio, Lord Nelson.
Horatio Nelson, 1st Viscount Nelson, who was created Viscount Nelson 1801, was senior naval officer of the Leeward Islands from 1784 to 1787 on HMS Boreas. During his tenure, he tried to enforce the Navigation Acts. These acts prohibited trade with the newly formed United States of America. Most of the merchants in Antigua depended upon American trade, so many of them despised Captain Nelson. As a result, he was unable to get a promotion for some time after his stint on the island. Unlike the Antiguan merchants, Nelson had a positive view of the Navigation Acts. The following quote from the Life of Horatio Lord Nelson by Robert Southey sums up his views about the controversial Navigation Acts. Southey then quotes Nelson as saying that the Antiguan colonists are as great rebels as ever were in America, had they the power to show it. A dockyard started in 1725, to provide a base for a squadron of British ships whose main function was to patrol the West Indies and thus maintain Britain's sea power, was later named Nelson's Dockyard in his honour. While Nelson was stationed on Antigua, he frequently visited the nearby island of Nevis, where he met and married a young widow, Fanny Nisbet, who had previously married the son of a plantation family on Nevis.
1918 labor unrest.
Following the foundation of the Attribution Universal Union, a friendly society which acted as a trade union, which were banned, the sugarcane workers were ready to confront the plantation owners when they slashed their wages. The cane workers went on strike and rioted when their leaders were arrested.
Political status.
In 1968, with Barbuda and the tiny island of Redonda as dependencies, Antigua became an associated state of the Commonwealth, and in 1981 it was disassociated from Britain. The country was then led by what many describe as an elected family dynasty, with Vir C. Bird, the first Prime Minister, having been succeeded in 1993 by Lester B. Bird, his son, who retained the post until 2004. Since March 2004 to present, Baldwin Spencer is appointed as their Prime Minister.
Demographics.
The ethnic distribution consists of 91% African, mulatto and mixed African Amerindian, 4.4% other mixed race, 1.7% white, 2.9% other, primarily East Indian and Asian. The majority of the white population is ethnically Irish and British, and Portuguese. There are also Christian Levantine Arabs, primarily of Syrian, Lebanese and Palestinian descent, and a small population of Asians and Sephardic Jews. Behind the late 20th century reviving and re-specifying of the place of African Antiguans and Barbudans in the cultural life of the society, is a history of race-ethnic relations that systematically excluded them. A colonial framework was established by the English soon after their initial settlement of Antigua in 1623. Mixed-race relationships and later immigration resulted by the late 19th century in the emergence of 5 distinct and carefully ranked race-ethnic groups. At the top of this hierarchy were the British, who justified their hegemony with arguments of white supremacy and civilizing missions. Among themselves, there were divisions between British Antiguans and non-creolized British, with the latter coming out on top. In short, this was a race-ethnic hierarchy that gave maximum recognition to anglicized persons and cultural practices. Immediately below the British, were the mulattoes, a mixed-race group resulting from unions between, generally, white European males and enslaved African women, many of which took place in the years before the expansion of enslaved African population. Mulattoes were lighter in shade than the masses of Africans. Some white fathers had their sons educated or trained in crafts. They sometimes benefited them in other ways, which led to the development of a separate class. Mulattoes gradually distinguished themselves from the masses of enslaved Africans. They developed complex ideologies of shade to legitimate their claims to higher status. These ideologies of shade paralleled in many ways British ideologies of white supremacy. Next in this hierarchy were the Portuguese, 2,500 of whom migrated as workers from Madeira between 1847 and 1852 because of a severe famine. Many established small businesses and joined the ranks of what was by then the mulatto middle class. The British never really considered Portuguese as their equals, so they were not allowed into their ranks. Among Portuguese Antiguans and Barbudans, status differences move along a continuum of varying degrees of assimilation into the anglicized practices of the dominant group. Below the Portuguese were the Middle Easterners, who began migrating to Antigua and Barbuda around the turn of the 20th century. Starting as itinerant traders, they soon worked their way into the middle strata of the society. Although Middle Easterners come from a variety of areas in the Middle East, as a group they are usually referred to as Syrians. Fifth and finally were the African Antiguans and Barbudans, who were located at the bottom of this hierarchy. Enslaved and forcefully transported, Africans started arriving in Antigua and Barbuda in large numbers during the 1670s. Very quickly they came to constitute the majority of the population. As they entered this hierarchy, Africans were profoundly racialized. They ceased being Ashanti, Yoruba and became Negroes or blacks. In the 20th century, the colonial hierarchy gradually began to come apart as a result of universal education and better economic opportunity. This process gave rise to Africans reaching the highest strata of society and government. In the last decade, Spanish-speaking immigrants from the Dominican Republic and from other African Caribbean immigrants from Guyana and Dominica have been added to this ethnic mosaic. As new immigrants often fleeing poverty and political unrest, they have entered at the bottom of the hierarchy. The country consists of immigrants from other countries, particularly Dominica, Guyana, Jamaica, Dominican Republic, and St. Vincent and the Grenadines. There is also a significant population of American citizens estimated at 4,500 people, one of the largest American citizen populations in the English-speaking Eastern Caribbean. A majority of Antiguans are Christians, 74%, with the Anglican Church, about 44% being the largest denomination. Catholicism is the other significant denomination, with the remainder being other Protestants, including Methodists, Moravians, Pentecostals, Seventh-day Adventists and Jehovah's Witnesses. Non-Christian religions practiced on the islands include Rastafari, Islam, Judaism, and Baha'i.
Sport.
The major Antiguan sport is cricket. Sir Viv Richards is one of the most famous Antiguans, who played for, and captained, the West Indies team. Richards scored the fastest Test century at the Antigua Recreation Ground. It was also the venue at which Brian Lara twice broke the world record for an individual Test innings, 375 in 1993/94, 400 not out in 2003 April. Antigua was the location of a 2007 Cricket World Cup site, on a new recreation ground constructed on an old cane field in the north of the island. Both football, soccer, and basketball are becoming popular among the island youth. There are several golf courses in Antigua. Being surrounded by water, sailing has been one of the most popular sports for years, with Antigua Sailing Week and Antigua Classic Yacht Regatta being two of the region's most reputable sailing competitions. Hundreds of yachts from around the world compete around Antigua each year. Sport fishing is also a very popular sport, with several big competitions held yearly. Windsurfing was very popular until kitesurfing came to the island with a big splash. Kitesurfing or kiteboarding is very popular at Jabberwock Beach. Local Antiguan André Philip is one of the most famous kite surfers in the world and spends much of his time training in Antigua and Barbuda.
Internet hosting and gambling.
Antigua was one of the very first nations to legalize, license, and regulate online gambling and is a primary location for incorporation of online gambling companies. Some countries, most notably the United States, argue that if a particular gambling transaction is initiated outside the country of Antigua, then that transaction is governed by the laws of the country where the transaction was initiated. This argument was brought before World Trade Organization and was deemed incorrect. In 2006, the United States Congress voted to approve the Unlawful Internet Gambling Enforcement Act, which criminalized the operations of offshore gambling operators which take wages from American-based gamblers. This was a prima facie violation of the GATS treaty obligations enforced by the WTO, resulting in a series of rulings unfavorable to the U.S. On December 21, 2007, an Article 22 arbitration panel ruled that the United States' failure to comply with WTO rules would attract a $21 million sanction. The WTO ruling was notable in two respects. First, although technically a victory for Antigua, the $21 million was far less than the $3.5 billion which had been sought. One of the three arbitrators was sufficiently bothered by the propriety of this that he issued a dissenting opinion, an unprecedented move. Second, a rider to the arbitration ruling affirmed the right of Antigua to take retaliatory steps in view of the prior failure of the U.S. to comply with GATS. These included the rare, but not unprecedented, right to disregard intellectual property obligations to the U.S. Antigua's obligations to the U.S. in respect of patents, copyright, and trademarks are affected. In particular, Berne Convention copyright is in question, and also material not covered by the Berne Convention, including TRIPS Accord obligations to the U.S. Antigua may thus disregard the WIPO Treaty on Intellectual Property Rights, and therefore the U.S. implementation of that treaty, the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, or DMCA, at least up to the limit of compensation. Since there is no appeal to the WTO from an arbitration panel of this kind, it represents the last legal word from the WTO on the matter. Antigua is therefore able to recoup some of the claimed loss of trade by hosting, and taxing, companies whose business model depends on immunity from TRIPS provisions. Software company Slysoft is based in Antigua, allowing it to avoid nations with laws that are tough on anti-circumvention of technological copyright measures, in particular the DMCA in the United States.
Eric Clapton and Crossroads Center.
Crossroads Center is a drug and alcohol addiction rehabilitation center located on the Caribbean island of Antigua. Founded by guitarist Eric Clapton and Richard Conte, CEO of the Priory Hospitals Group, London, and Transitional Hospitals Corporation, Nevada. All development of the facility was performed by officers and employees of these two companies. Conte and Clapton served as the center's first two board members, with Conte being chairman. Transitional put up all working capital during the development phase, and the facility was initially owned 2/3 by Transitional and 1/3 by Clapton. Former Prime Minister Lester Bird of Antigua was integrally involved by Transitional and arranged for the government of Antigua's assistance with roads, utilities and a favorable land purchase price. Conte's wife is credited with naming the facility, and his associate Lester Keyser of Transitional was the point man on the project.
Banking. Stanford International Bank.
Stanford International Bank was formed by Alan Stanford in 1986 in Montserrat, where it was called Guardian International Bank. Alan Stanford's move into banking utilized funds he had made in real estate in Houston, Texas, in the early 1980s. There was no direct connection between Stanford's insurance business in Texas and the banking business. Stanford relocated its operations to Antigua. The bank's portfolio was overseen by an investment committee consisting of Alan Stanford. His father, Laura Pendergast Holt, Stanford Financial Group's chief investment officer. James M. Davis, Alan Stanford's college roommate, CFO of Stanford International Bank. And a resident of Mexia, Texas, where Stanford's U.S. interests were based, with cattle ranching and car sales experience. On February 17, 2009, the SEC charged Alan Stanford, Pendergast Holt and Davis with fraud in connection with the bank's $8 billion Certificate of Deposit, CD, investment scheme that offered improbable and unsubstantiated high interest rates. This led the federal government to freeze the assets of the bank and other Stanford entities. In addition, the bank placed a 60-day moratorium on early redemptions of its CDs. On February 27, 2009, Pendergast Holt was arrested by federal agents in connection with the alleged fraud. On that day the SEC said that Stanford and his accomplices operated a massive Ponzi scheme, misappropriated billions of investors' money and falsified the Stanford International Bank's records to hide their fraud. Stanford International Bank's financial statements, including its investment income, are fictional, the SEC said.
Antigua Overseas Bank.
Antigua Overseas Bank, AOB, was part of the ABI Financial Group and was a licensed bank in Antigua. On April 13, 2012, AOB was placed into receivership by the government of Antigua.
Swiss American Bank.
Swiss American Bank Limited, later renamed Global Bank of Commerce, Limited, was formed in April 1983 and became the first international financial institution governed by the International Business Corporations Act of 1982 licensed bank in Antigua. The bank was later sued by the United States for failure to release forfeited funds from one of its account holders. Swiss American Bank was founded by Bruce Rappaport.
Notable residents.
Andrei Mykolanovich Shevchenko, former Ukrainian footballer and politician, Giorgio Armani, Italian fashion designer. Owns a home near Galley Bay, Calvin Ayre, billionaire founder of internet gambling company Bodog Entertainment Group, Silvio Berlusconi, former Italian Prime Minister, Richard Branson, Virgin Atlantic mogul, Viv Richards, West Indian cricket legend. The Sir Vivian Richards Stadium in Antigua was named in his honor. Timothy Dalton, actor of James Bond fame, Eric Clapton, established an Antiguan drug treatment center. Has a home on the south of the island. Ken Follett, the author of Eye of the Needle, owns a house on Jumbie Bay. Maria Elena John, Antiguan writer and former African Development Foundation specialist. Her debut novel, Unburnable, was selected Best Debut of 2006 by Black Issues Book Review. Jamaica Kincaid, novelist famous for her writings about life on Antigua. Her book A Small Place was banned under the Via Bird administration. Lee Malvo, sniper, was recruited by John Allen Muhammad in Antigua in 2001. They went on to kill several people in the Washington, D.C. area in 2002. Alan Stanford, Texan billionaire and defrauder. Robin Leach of Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous fame. Archibald McLeish, poet and U.S. Librarian of Congress. Rachel Lambert Mellon, horticulturalist and philanthropist, has owned a compound in Antigua's Half Moon Bay since the 1950s. John Allen Muhammad, sniper and trainer, lived in Antigua from 2000 to 2002. Andy Roberts, the first Antiguan to play Test cricket for the West Indies. He was a member of the West Indies teams that won the 1975 and 1979 World Cups. Curtly Ambrose, legendary West Indian cricketer. Richie Richardson, former West Indies cricket team captain. Peter Stringfellow, British nightclub owner. John Barrowman, actor, singer, entertainer. Thomas J. Watson Jr., CEO of IBM. Oprah Winfrey, talk show host.
Gallery.